In those first few days, the door had a mind of its own, manifesting around the house like a rabbit from a hat, never staying in one place for more than 10 seconds at a time. But by day 4, it seemed to have settled in the basement. Down there, the air was cool, and shelves wrapped around 3 of the 4 sides. A bare bulb in the middle of the room brightened and dimmed as I pushed aside musty boxes marked Christmas decorations. Those photo albums had to be close by. As I inspected the nook beneath the narrow staircase, there is a sound to my right, from the direction of the door. A heavy, toneless, frightening bang. I forced myself not to look over until it had happened again. And then there was a moment of jarring silence, followed by 2 knocks. Above my head, the bulb began to flicker. Now the air felt warm and clammy. Before, there had never been any sounds from behind the door. It just sat there, a tumorous growth along the wall, always vanishing with a rub of my eyes or a shake of my head. While I stood cemented on the spot, and I forced myself not to think about what lay on the other side, the bulb finally died. Now the door seemed to expand and contract like a pair of flexing lungs. Inhale, exhale. There it was again. Knock, knock. My brain screamed, run. But instead, both legs gave out and I collapsed into a shelf. Tins of white and blue paint toppled over and splattered across the floor. By the time that I found my feet, the knock had become a furious thumping that rattled the wood in its housing. The door came alive, lurching, pulsing, threatening to burst off its hinges. At the very last moment, as I had reached the top of the stairs, I glanced back and saw it jump violently, as if someone had swung a sledgehammer against the other side. In the safety of the downstairs hall, I realized that I had been holding my breath the entire time. "Darren!" My mom emerged from the kitchen, holding onto the wall for support. Just walking was difficult for her. "I heard a crash. What happened?" "The dang light went out and I spilled some paint," I said. My left pant leg was speckled white. "I'll pick up a new bulb and clean up the mess tomorrow." Later, she made us both vegetable soup for dinner. The doctor had advised her to rest into the spinal surgery, my whole reason for moving back home, but convincing her to listen was like chewing salt. She filled 2 bowls and found a seat, and groaned painfully as she plopped down. We watched a news report about some bad thing that recently happened close by. A 7-year-old named Abby had vanished from her home. 2 officers discovered her grandmother's body in a bedroom, her belly open like a fish. Mom tutted, "Isn't that desperate? First the break-ins and now this." The story had sent shockwaves throughout the entire neighborhood. Tony and Clark, the couple who lived next door, even installed a video doorbell. Although the side window that they sometimes left open was how most experienced burglars would break in. Abby's mother, a blonde lady in her 30s, sobbed on camera and made a desperate appeal for anyone with information to come forward. Mom tutted and said, "That poor woman. Imagine what she's going through after losing both her mother and her daughter." When a picture of Abby had appeared, I switched off the TV. Mom turned to face me. "Speaking of, when are you gonna find a nice girl and settle down?" Her voice had gone serious. I waited for the next part. "I'm not gonna live forever, you know." There it was. Ever since Dad's heart attack, Mom had made a point to frequently remind me how the only thing she wanted, before she kicked the bucket, was some grandchildren to spoil. "Settle down," I asked. "Where am I going to find someone who measures up to you?" It was a futile attempt to dissolve the tension, She just glared at me. Soon Mom was ready for bed. By the time that I helped her upstairs and into her gown, the door had crept to the side wall of her room, almost entirely covered by a dresser. Switching on the bedside lamp, I said, "There, anything else I can..." My voice trailed off. Mom had reached forward, pressed a cold hand against my forehead and said, "Is everything okay? You look pale." Sometimes it was hard to remember who was taking care of who. There was a clamor of noises, and then the handle jiggled. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, "just tired." The door thudded against the dresser, and then from behind, I heard hard fingers scrape against the wood. Mom rolled onto her side, oblivious to the muffled noises. "Okay, night, Darren." The scraping continued. "Night, Mom." For the rest of the evening, the door was more active than ever. Before, it never appeared for long. Heck, those first 2 days I wasn't sure whether I'd actually seen it at all. But now it stalked me, following me to the bathroom, along the hall and into the lounge. I felt perpetually spied upon. I imagined that I could hear its thoughts.
"Yup, I'm still here. And I'm not going anywhere."
If not for my mom's condition, I would have hightailed it to the hotel. Or maybe slept in a tent. I reminded myself that the door wasn't real, that it wasn't some boogeyman.
We both know that's not true.
In my bedroom, thunder boomed beyond the window. Rain fell hard against the glass, and the door dozed beyond the foot of my bed. I lay down and tried to sleep. After a few minutes, the handle began to rattle and turn. I sat up and stared so fixedly that I didn't even notice my heart miss its rhythm. The door slowly shivered open 3 inches, 4 inches, 5. And as it did, the room shifted on its axis, tilting downward. My bed's metal legs slid across the wooden floor. The incline became steeper and steeper until the floor was entirely vertical and the door was thrown open wide. Beyond it lay a long black tunnel. Furniture fell towards the side of the room. My stomach leaped as it would on a roller coaster as I plummeted sideways. The bed rotated, becoming awkwardly pinched between walls, and at the very last second, I caught a hold of the frame and I held on. Darkness seeped out of the tunnel, snapping at the soles of my bare feet. The door wanted to swallow me whole, to drag me into endless blackness, into the sinister world on the other side. My heart pounded in my ears as it laughed.
"Wanna come play, Darren?"
My legs dangled above the hungry, hungry mouth. Palm sweat forced me to constantly readjust my grip. I couldn't hold on for much longer. Was this a punishment from God? Why? Why me?
You know why.
No! I screamed out loud. And with that, my strength gave out, and I fell onto the floor with a stiff grunt. Suddenly, the room and everything in it was right side up. Was it just a nightmare? From down the hall, my mom called my name. No, it wasn't a nightmare. The door had gone after her.
"You're not too much trouble. I'll eat your mother instead. Much easier prey."
I burst into her room and rushed to her side. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" I put a hand on her cheek. "Speak to me." She looked puzzled. "I was gonna ask for a glass of water, but if you're feeling sick, I'll make you some." "No, I'm fine. I just worried about you is all. Stay here while I get you that water." Still trembling from the earlier encounter, I returned to bed. The door remained perfectly still. Perhaps it was dozing. A few minutes later, there was a faint dapping. I squeezed my eyelids together and folded the pillow over my ears, desperate to ignore the sounds, to pretend everything was fine. But now I could sense the door radiate malevolence, radiate hatred. That sense became intolerable, and Mom's soup almost slid up again. I finally looked over. Thunder boomed outside, briefly throwing light around the room. The door was no longer mounted against the wall. Now it was standing dead ahead, drawing closer and closer. As it approached my bed, the cramped room became claustrophobic. Something hefty threw itself against the other side, and like a child, I pulled the sheets up over my head. The bumps and bangs grew louder and faster, and then it sounded like the armies of hell were about to burst through. And then the sounds vanished, and for a moment I thought that was it, that the nightmare was over. But as I lowered the sheet to my nose, the handle rotated all the way down. All I could do was lay still and watch the door swing outward, squealing on its hinges. Beyond the frame was part of a stone wall and a rickety set of stairs that descended into a thick, damp darkness. Swallowing a lump in my throat, I inched forward and whispered, "Hello?" "Help me," said a tiny voice. The door stalked me through farm country, teleporting ahead to the edge of fields each time it disappeared in my rearview mirror. The stench of sun-baked cow crap was strong in my nostrils. Mom's neighbors had agreed to check on her while I was out of town, although I was far more concerned with the prospect of getting murdered out in the sticks. My destination was a high school football stadium. There were 16 people in the bleachers, one of whom was the sicko I had come to find. He had dirty blonde hair and wore an XXXL sweatshirt with a jaguar, the home team's mascot, on the front. My forearm hair stirred at the sight of him. The guy would probably squish my skull with just one of his lunchbox-sized paws. Or maybe he'd cut my belly open since he was proficient at that. He sat alongside another man, likely his brother. I found a seat 2 rows back just as the pair began a spirited debate about which of the cheerleaders would give the best head. Down by the field, the Doors seemed to doze by the end zone. My target's name was Chance, and towards the end of the fourth quarter, as he bragged about his fancy new hunting rifle, a giant lump formed in my throat. After the game, I climbed into my Accord and followed him west. I kept my distance and I drove with the headlights off. Even though I had done nothing illegal yet, the notion of what I was about to do sent my blood pressure into the stratosphere. I had broken into countless houses, but those were city homes whose occupants were unarmed, or they were on vacation. But here, these stakes were much higher. Once or twice, I almost lost the creep's pickup and had to slam on the gas. Throughout the journey, the Doors stayed left on the highway, lurching as if a locomotive had rammed into the other side. Chance eventually turned into a dirt road pinched between yellow fields. At the far end was a crooked farmhouse, leaning to one side like a drunk soldier supported by his rifle. Pulling up beside the road, the Doors settled amongst the weeds, threateningly close. Was this a warning?
Act fast. If she winds up dead with dirt in her face and worms in her hair, I'll make sure you join her.
Just a little longer, I said out loud. Please. After sunset, I slipped a lockpick and a can of mace into my jacket's hidden pocket, hopped the fence, and I shuffled through the field. From behind a busted fence post, I watched Chance wander around the house, silhouetted against an inside light. The old building had a rickety porch that wrapped around 2 sides and plywood sheets nailed over sections of the roof. For the next hour, The wind made little twisters of dust as the door drew closer and closer until it finally touched the back of my heels, entrenching me like a soldier in a foxhole. Didn't understand that we had to wait. Otherwise, the whole plan would be a bust. At midnight, the lights finally went out, and then, with a chance asleep, there was nothing to keep me from my duty, besides nerves, that is. 5 minutes passed, and then another 10. I repeatedly psyched myself up, only to wuss out at the last second. Eventually, I let out a deep exhale, turned around and said, "I can't do this, I'm sorry." My grief poured out. "I'll talk to the sheriff again and make him believe me. Breaking into that psycho's house, it's too much." Something hammered at the door. Fear drilled into me like a hot needle as it became faster and louder. The thuds which rattled the wood almost rattled my brain. "I'm sorry," I said desperately. There was a terrifying thumping, and then the door glided toward me, sliding as if mounted on wheels. I tried to run, but instead it tripped and fell backward. My fingers sank into the dirt as I scrambled back. Imaginary icy claws seemed to crawl over my skin.
Do it now, or I'll drag you out of this world and into the next.
"Stop," I screamed, not wanting to find out what was at the side. "I'll make it right, I swear." After 3 deep breaths, I picked myself up and made my way toward the house. Since the porch would have sunk under the faintest pressure, I crept around the back, where our kitchen window had no glass. Sliding through the narrow gap backward, the frame cut into my stomach, which made me picture Chance slitting my belly again. Inside, the walls were caked with black mold, and fat flies buzzed around. There was a stack of slimy dishes infested with giant maggots, pulsating in lewd, split open garbage bags, empty cans, and liquor bottles. This was not a man who took care of himself, or made rational decisions. I listened carefully to the wet snores from upstairs, louder than traffic. He was fast asleep. That was a good start. The old house seemed aware of me, rattling as I crept around. I made a lap of the ground floor, searching for hidden compartments or a secret room. Beneath the stairs, there was a thin slot along the wall that clicked and swung outward with a gentle push. Behind it was a hidden compartment with a metal door. As I carefully turned the stiff handle, the door groaned and whined, a sound which made my testicles shrink. I glanced at the ceiling. Upstairs, the rhythmic snores continued. If Chance woke up, could I make it out through the kitchen window before he had time to grab his rifle and come barreling down the steps? It seemed unlikely. As the door swung open, my heart stopped dead. There it was, the staircase. I had conflicted feelings. On one hand, I wasn't crazy. On the other, that meant I knew what was down there. I felt my way along a stone wall and I climbed down the steps. There was an ungodly stench of coldness and damp. No human belonged in that place. Halfway across the room, I stepped onto the corner of an old, stained mattress and froze. "Hello?" I whispered. A girl whimpered. Her voice sounded low. She was sitting on the floor. I crouched down until I could make out a frail figure huddled against the wall. When I reached out, the girl flinched and screamed. A shiver raced along my spine. Somebody walking over my grave, my mom would say. I quickly clamped my palm over her mouth and whispered, "Don't worry, I'm not him. I'm here to rescue you." When she stopped squirming, I said, "I know who you are. Your name is Abby. People are looking for you. I'm going to get you back to your mom, but first you have to be quiet. Can you do that for me?" She nodded into my hand. I felt around, building a mental picture of the scene. A blanket covered Abby's legs and her wrists were cuffed and chained to the wall. Her lips were cracked and peeled, her eyes sunken in dark pouches of flesh. She was a living skeleton, presumably because her captor hadn't fed her properly since taking her. No wonder the door was so irate. I leaned close to her and said, "Do you know where he keeps the key to these cuffs?" She shook her head, her face beginning to tremble, and I knew that she was trying not to cry. "Hey, that's okay, don't panic." I pulled on my lockpick and got to work. In the gloom, with my hands so shaky and badly sweating, the task took much longer than I would have liked. My thoughts steered back to 3 nights earlier, when the door had opened in my bedroom and a voice had whimpered, "Help me." A light bulb blinked on, revealing Abby, who I had recognized from the news, at the bottom of a rickety set of stairs. I watched through the doorway as her captor, Chance, descended the steps with a tray of half-devoured chicken wings. The entire sequence played out like a movie. No matter how hard I screamed or yelled, I was unable to interact with the scene in any way. Chance offered Abby a few morsels, which after some initial reluctance, she accepted. He reached out to caress her hair, but she flinched away, as far as her chain would allow. And then he said, "Don't worry, not until you're ready." On his way back up the stairs, the last thing I saw was the Jaguar in a sweatshirt, and then the door swung closed with a bang. I had gone straight to the police and explained what I had seen. A burly officer said, "Yeah, sure, pal, we'll get right on your tip from the magic door." I went online and found out the mascot matched that of a high school football team in a small town, 60 miles west of my own. But the local sheriff's office hadn't been receptive to my suggestions either. And so, I had given up rescuing Abby. But then for the next few days, the door became more alive and animated than ever. It showed me her twice more, once alone, once with Chance, and the message was clear.
It's your fault she's in that situation, so you'd better do something about it.
From then on, the door stalked me morning, noon, and night, and the terrible thuds were so loud and jarring that I couldn't sleep or think. There had to be a reason for what it had showed me, and the only explanation was it wanted me to intervene, to rescue her. And if I didn't, since the police refused to help, I took matters into my own hands, and that led me to Chance. Back in the room, the padlock around Abby's cuffs soon popped open. I ripped them off and scooped her into my arms, but before I could do anything else, a bulb blinked on. Abby's sunken eyes opened wider than dinner plates. I spun around and saw Chance, a huge figure who looked almost comically large against the doorway, wearing a loud Hawaiian t-shirt covered with barbecue sauce and sweat stains. His hairy belly spilled over his sweatpants, and he was taller than Abby, and eyes stacked on top of one another. "Who the F are you?" he snarled, exposing a mouthful of rotted teeth. And then he pushed the metal door shut with a slam and he came down the steps. With Abby still in my arms, I retreated across the room and said, "Easy now." "What are you doing in my house?" he growled. "Please, mister, I just want to go home," Abby whispered, burying her head in my chest. "Can you take me home?" My mouth was open. It felt dry and I licked my lips. "Hey, we can work this out. Nobody has to get hurt." Chance snickered. "Work this out?" I could see the veins in his temples. "Just let the girl go and we'll forget this happened. I don't have to tell anybody who you are." My gut sank, like I had tried to barter a deal with Satan himself. "You break into my house, go snooping around, and you think I'm just gonna let you stroll on out." He grinned and Abby sobbed. My heartbeat rose. "Let us go," I said. meaning to sound like a threat, but it came out like I was begging. No, the girl's mine and she stays. Now, he was on the stone floor, less than 6 feet away. I wanted to run, to barrel past him, but there was no way that I would make it. Abby clung to me, begging to see her mommy. Chance came to a halt and said, "Who the heck are you anyway?" Looking back, I should have said the police or the FBI. I should have said my entire department knew exactly where I was, and that my disappearance would bring them knocking, and that he might as well surrender now while the charges were just kidnapping, instead of taking on murder as well. But all I did was swallow a lump and said, "Nobody." Good. He came at me, and he was fast too, faster than I would have guessed. He clamped his hands around my throat and drove the back of my skull into the wall, while Abby tumbled to the ground. And then he reeled me back and he did it again. I smashed my elbow on the hinge of his jaw. I had been in scraps before, but Chance was practically superhuman, and he shrugged off the blow. For a moment, we waltzed around the room while Abby crawled into the corner whimpering. Chance hoisted me off the ground. Up close, I could smell his breath, rotten and yellow. For a few seconds, I kicked my legs back and forth, before fumbling through my pocket for the mace and spraying it directly into his eyes. He ignored the pain for about 10 seconds before releasing me, at which point my own vision was swimming. Just the blowback felt like dousing both corneas with battery acid. I crawled around him while he pawed his red eyes and snarled like a rabid dog. He wildly swept his arms across the room in search of me. Abby had her knees pulled into her chest, her head buried in her lap. Fighting Chance was not an option. We had to run for it. But before I could reach her, the guy fumbled around the floor and seized me from behind. I flipped and twisted like a worm, trying to wriggle out of his grasp, but had all the success of a 10-year-old boy wrestling his father. Chance's right hand clamped around my neck. There were at least 5 blows to my face, and then I spat sticky warm blood. Crap. Was this how it felt to get bludgeoned to death? There was more desperate fumbling, a finger in the eye, a kick to the knee. At one point, I flipped onto my chest, and Chance effortlessly picked me up and rammed my face into the concrete wall again and again until my front teeth had snapped. Things calmed down while Chance rubbed his eyes, unable to suppress the sting any longer. His rage seemed to build like a pressure cooker turned up too high. I almost wanted him to get it over with before he became even more furious and decided to take it slow and make my death a long, drawn-out affair. Still squinting, he grabbed my neck and held me against the wall one last time. Death by strangulation. Honestly, it was something of a relief. At least soon, the pain would be gone. I failed. Sorry, Abby. At that moment, my thoughts rewound to the night of the abduction. I had broken into a fancy house, a 3-story one with fancy knockers and a high iron fence. I had left my criminal past behind years earlier, but with my mom's medical bills piling up, I soon found myself thieving again. My timing had been awful. That night as I rummaged through the lounge, searching for jewelry or even a purse, there was a noise from the next room, and I dove beneath the table, thinking that the occupants had woken up. At the far side of the room was an open door, through which an elderly lady, Abby's grandmother, staggered through. She had on a gray dressing gown, and there was a long slit across her belly, through which I could see dark blood pumping out. Before she could even take 5 unsteady steps, a gigantic masked man, Chance, suddenly appeared, clamped a hand around her mouth, and reeled her back. She held onto the doorway with one hand clenched so tight that the nails had separated from the bed, smearing red along the frame. The thick globs had the consistency of jelly. At the very last second, the lady's eyes flicked around the room and found mine. The realization hit her like a lightning bolt. Maybe if she could have talked, she would have said, "My granddaughter's in the next room. Save her, please, please save her." But instead, she got dragged away. At the very last second, The lady grabbed a hold of the door and pulled it shut with a slam. And from that moment on, that same door haunted me. I was out of the house in a heartbeat. Back home, I contemplated what to do. Should I call the police? But then what? They would ask me why I was in the house, how I saw what I saw, and I would have to tell them that I had broken in. And even if I had made up some plausible excuse, they would grow suspicious and look at the recent uptick in robberies and put two and two together. I justified it to myself 1,000 different ways. I really didn't see anything. The man that was wearing a mask, it all happened too fast. Nobody would believe me. The attacker might come after my mom in an act of revenge. If I had known back then that the lady's granddaughter had been staying with her, I would have bit the bullet and confessed. But it was 3 days before the reports came in, and so, to my great shame, I kept my mouth shut. And that's when the door appeared. Those memories were driven from my mind by a roundhouse slab. In the cellar, darkness crept to the edge of my vision. My hands beat feebly at Chance's face and chest. This really was the end. Knock, knock. Wait, what was that? And then thumping. My hand fumbled across the wall. The door was there, threatening to rattle right off its hinges. I felt around and I touched the cold handle. There was no way of knowing what might happen if I had opened it. Maybe a horned demon with a red-hot poker would step through and drag me to hell as retribution for my sins. Or maybe I would get sucked through into an endless void. But none of that mattered. If there was even the slightest chance opening it could help Abby, I had to take it. Call it my atonement. It was Hail Mary time. I closed my eyes and I twisted at the handle. The door flew open. There was a hefty bang as it hit the wall, which made Chance jump. Had he heard it too? Suddenly, the immense pressure on my neck had eased. Even through the mace-induced tears, I could read Chance's expression. He was confused, terrified even. The door was no longer in my head. Chance could see it too. There was a noise from behind it, unsteady footsteps. As I craned my neck to look over, fingers with missing nails wrapped around the frame, I smelled something foul, something dark and sour like dead fish. It was 1,000 times worse than the taste of the cellar. Chance released my neck, sending me sliding to the floor, just as a twisted figure stepped into the room. It was Abby's grandmother, or it had been at least. Half of her skull was crushed and her neck had been broken. Part of the collarbone jutted out from her neck, and from her forehead. Fluid seeped over her eyes, nose, and mouth, dripping off her chin and over the floor. Dangling limply from her waist were shiny intestines, coiled around her leg and trailing behind her. The nails on her right hand were missing, and she was making a series of gurgling sounds in her throat. Chance scrambled back, his eyes hazy and pale like a man struck with cataracts. The twisted figure slowly turned toward me. I could practically hear her thoughts.
You've done your part and paid for your mistakes. Now take Abby and go. You don't want to see this next part.
In the corner, Abby had her hands over her ears and her head buried in her thighs. I scooped her up and whispered, "Keep your eyes closed." Now that the adrenaline was wearing off, my face throbbed painfully. It occurred to me that Abby's grandmother had perhaps let the events play out a little longer than strictly necessary, as a form of punishment for being a coward. I barreled up the steps in a heartbeat, and behind me, Chance was screaming, endlessly screaming. I could still hear his screams from halfway across the field. At the sheriff's office, there were lots of questions. He was suspicious as to how I had found Abby, and although it was clear he didn't buy my story, since she confirmed I rescued her and had nothing to do with the abduction, he didn't push the issue for long. As for Chance, 2 sheriffs found him in a cellar, lips blue and face sickeningly white. His cause of death, a heart attack. For bringing Abby home safe and sound, I became something of a local hero. The official story was that I had spotted a suspicious vehicle the night of the abduction and, through amateur sleuthing, found her captor and took the law into my own hands. A few months passed. My face healed, my mom's surgery came and went, and soon it was looking like she could take care of herself again, with regular visits from me, of course. She was immensely proud of what I had done, and on more than one occasion suggested that I use my newfound fame to romance a nice girl and to settle down. The day before I moved out, there was a knock at the door. The very moment it slid open, Abby darted forward and hugged my waist. Her mom was standing on the porch carrying a peanut pie. Things had been crazy since the rescue, and we had all crossed paths on more than one occasion. But now that everybody had had a chance to heal, she wanted to give me a proper thank you. Afterward, as she and Abby wandered across the yard hand in hand, Mom whispered from behind the door, "She's got no wedding ring. Invite her in for cake." I jumped. I hadn't even realized she was there. No, I couldn't. "Excuse me, miss," Mom shouted as stepping outside. The lady stopped and turned around. "Darren wanted to know if you and Abby would like to come in for cake." Abby jumped up and down and nodded enthusiastically. "Please, Mom, please." She smiled. "Okay." Mom nudged me in the ribs and said, "Now you be a gentleman and go set the table." Forcing a smile, I rolled my eyes and kissed her on the forehead, and then said, "Sure thing."